Hey, welcome back to the channel. Are you ready to face your darkest fears? Tonight, we're diving into 3 terrifying horror stories. From eerie whispers in the dark to the unsettling truth behind a barren road. Who's really waiting on the barren road? Let's find out, but don't say I didn't warn you. Claire Rivers had always had an attraction with the spooky and impossible to explain. She reported on ghost hauntings, haunted homes, and disappearances that left the authorities perplexed as a journalist known for uncovering the most strange tales. But when she stood at the beginning of a road that had become notable for its strange and terrible past, she felt a sense of unease that none of her earlier investigations had left her with. The crumbling and cracked road turned into a portal to an inexplicable dimension at exactly 3 a.m. every night. After that hour, teenagers who came onto it vanished, leaving behind rumors of eerie noises, disembodied murmurs, and odd shadows. Claire was resolved to crack the mystery once and for all tonight. Along with a camera and a recorder, she stood at the road's edge. The cracked pavement going into darkness, highlighted only by the dim sparkle of street lamps. Despite the summer heat, there was an unusual stillness in the air, and the wind expressed a strange chill. Claire looked down at her watch and felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. By around 3 a.m., there was a deep rumble in the night air as soon as the clock struck 3. The road ahead looked to be buzzing with life, and Claire's heart skipped a beat. It was blurred at first, just a shift in the shadows. But when she took her first step onto the road, something inhuman tugged at her. As if it had been waiting for her, the road seemed to take a breath. Claire took a deep breath and gripped the camera more tightly. With a shaky voice, she whispered to herself, "This is it. I will not go back." The atmosphere became heavy with an oppressive weight as her footsteps echoed in the quiet. An unsettling, oppressive silence surrounded her, replacing the typical noises of rustling foliage and nocturnal wildlife. The road itself seemed to be watching Claire, waiting for her to make a mistake. Her breath was creating icy clouds that floated in the gloomy light as her body temperature dropped by the second. She kept on walking, feeling as though the road was trying to pull her farther into its grasp with each stride. The shadows twisted and moved like living beings, appearing to be unusually long. Despite the constant sense of dread that was about to engulf her, Claire proceeded in her resolve to document the truth on film. Then, she heard a sound that stopped her in her tracks as she was about to enter a particularly dark section of the road. A whisper. It's faint but distinct. She turned, but there was nobody. Behind her, the road was empty and motionless. Who was present? Claire yelled out, trying to sound confident, but her voice was trembling. The whisper came again, this time louder and more distinct. It sounded like her name, Claire, carried on the wind, but twisted and distorted as if from a deep, hollow place. Suddenly, the camera's monitor flickered. After a brief period of darkness, the screen came back to life and showed a figure standing at the far end of the road. A shadow-covered form with bright eyes that seemed to pierce the night. As Claire raised the camera and zoomed in, her breath seized in her throat. Even though the ghostly figure remained motionless, its presence was enormous. The air between them seemed to have thickened, making it more difficult for her to breathe. Claire felt a cold shiver run up her spine as the figure's eyes were fixed on hers, clearly gazing into her soul. A voice whispered, "Run," but it came from the air surrounding her rather than the figure. She recognized the voice, her mother's. Claire feels her heart hit her ribs hard. Long ago forgotten, the voice had been buried deep in the back of her mind. The voice seemed to have been waiting for Claire to hear it again, even though her mother had passed away when she was only a young child. As the figure in the distance started to move, slowly, deliberately, gliding toward her with unreal fluidity, Claire's heart raced. The road underneath her appeared to move, its fissured surface spreading as though it were trying to engulf her. Claire felt a shock of panic, but her legs would not cooperate. Her body seemed motionless as she attempted to turn and flee. She was imprisoned by the road, and she sensed its power becoming stronger with every heartbeat. A group of voices, hollow, turned, and filled with agony, joined the growing, more desperate whispered. While each voice appeared to be coming from a different location, they were all speaking simultaneously and constantly saying the same thing. Come back. Return. Claire's vision became blurry as the darkness engulfed her and the shadows around her became longer. As though the universe were slowly consuming her, she could hear the faint sound of her own breath, feeble and frantic. A flash of memory appeared in the middle of the chaos, which caught her off guard. A fragment of her childhood, warped and blurry by the passage of time. She imagined herself running with a young girl down a street similar to this one. The young girl was weeping and begging with Claire to stop, but Claire kept in running and urged her to keep up. She was running, but why? Why were they being ran? The road was unfazed by Claire's confused thoughts. She was being drawn farther into its hold and into a history she had long ago forgotten. She was suffocated by the darkness until she found herself standing in an unexpected and weird location, a ruined and forgotten house. The earlier figure stood in front of her, but it was sharper and more distinct now. It wasn't a human. It was something completely different, something composed of whispers and shadows. Claire's heart stopped in her chest as it extended long, clawed fingers. The figure that appeared said, "You're part of it now," with a voice that sounded like 1,000 voices. "The road remembers you." Suddenly, Claire was dragged back to the road, gasping for breath. Her camera fell out of her fingers and onto the floor as she fell backward. The darkness persisted as if it had never left, but the road was quiet again. The whispers, the memories, the sense of being surrounded by people watching you. Claire was unsure of how long she had been standing there, terrified by terror. But she was confident that the road did more than simply carry people. It captured them in its never-ending search for secrets. It wasn't just that the road took the lost people's souls. The reason for this was that the road was alive and fed off the regrets, tensions, and forgotten fragments of everyone who dared to cross its legendary course. Claire turned and ran, never turning back until the first rays of morning peeked over the horizon. She continued despite the whispers following her. She was unsure if she had managed to get away or if she had just joined the road's sinister past. However, there was no doubt that the road would always remember her.